So let's talk about a pretty wild thought experiment. It comes from authors Peter Duke and Matthew Crawford, and they ask a fascinating question. What if two of the biggest reality TV shows of all time, Survivor and The Apprentice, weren't just simple entertainment? What if they were actually a kind of public beta test for a whole new way of running a government?
Yeah, that's the central question they pose. Just think about that for a second. What if these shows were more than a competition for $1 million or a high-paying job? The theory suggests their very structure was designed to get millions of us comfortable with a new kind of political power, one built entirely on spectacle, conflict, and of course, elimination. The authors call this the Trojan horse theory, and it's a fitting name, right? The idea is that these primetime shows snuck a radical new political logic right into our living rooms, disguised as harmless fun. They argue it was actually a really clever, deliberate campaign to completely reshape how we think about power and who we see as fit to wield it. Now, the source uses this phrase, weaponized logic, and what they mean is that this wasn't an accident. It was a conscious effort to float these new political models, to trial balloon them. And the audience? Well, we were the massive, unwitting focus group, showing them exactly how we'd react to systems where things like trust and loyalty aren't assets, but actual liabilities.
So, what is this logic they're talking about? What's the underlying code that powered these game shows? Well, according to the theory, it's a very specific set of rules that dictates how power works when traditional systems start to break down.
It's a concept called non-cooperative game theory. It was first mapped out by the mathematician John Nash way back in the 1950s. And really, it's a blueprint for human behavior in a world with no real trust. You can't rely on anyone else's word, so everyone is just out for themselves, constantly calculating what everyone else is going to do next. Sound familiar? And these are the core tactics of that world. Alliances? They only last as long as they're useful. You never show your true cards. Deception gets you further than loyalty. Knowing something someone else doesn't is a weapon, and if you hesitate, you're toast. As the source says, in this kind of game, trust creates exposure. It makes you a target. So, according to this theory, producer Mark Burnett took this exact playbook from game theory and built two of the biggest shows in history around it. He basically created two different but deeply related simulations for how power could work. And this comparison is absolutely key to the whole idea. On one hand, you have Survivor. It's a decentralized, chaotic system. Power is always shifting. Alliances are made to be broken. And in the end, your fate is decided by a jury of the very people you betrayed, a republic of the rejected. But then you have The Apprentice. It's the total opposite, a pure monarchy. Power is totally centralized in one person. The hierarchy is rigid, and you win by proving your loyalty and competence to that single authority. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds like a bit of a stretch, get this. The source points to this quote from Jeff Probst, the host of Survivor. He literally told future players to go study John Nash and game theory. The producers weren't hiding the ball here. They were flat out telling us that this theory wasn't just part of the show, it was the show. Okay, so here's where the theory really connects the dots from our TV screens to the real world. While these simulations were playing out for millions of us every week, the source argues a parallel political idea was taking shape, pushed by a very specific theorist and a very powerful funder. So the theorist is a man named Curtis Yarvin. Back in 2007, he started a blog where he laid out this idea he called formalism. And his basic pitch was that modern government is like buggy, obsolete software that needs a complete reboot. His solution? Run the government like a startup, with a powerful, decisive CEO sovereign at the top who could get things done without all the messiness of democracy. And that brings us to the funder, tech billionaire Peter Thiel. In 2009, he wrote this very sentence, making it pretty clear where he stood. He was deeply skeptical of democracy and found himself aligned with Yarvin's ideas about a more streamlined, executive-driven kind of government. And the source points out that Thiel didn't just talk about these ideas. He actively worked to bring them into the mainstream. He publicly endorsed the logic, he advocated for it, he even funded Curtis Yarvin's company. And then, in 2016, he walked onto the stage at the Republican National Convention and endorsed the one man who had perfected the role of the CEO sovereign on television for over a decade.
And this is the critical connection, right? It's how all these different threads, the TV shows, the political theory, the tech money, all seem to wrap around one single figure, helping to transform him from a reality TV host into a plausible real-world leader.
When you lay out the timeline, it's pretty striking. First, the TV models appear and become massive hits. Then, the political theory gets written down and circulated. Finally, the money and political backing click into place, and it all culminates in an election. The source argues this sequence feels just a little too perfect to be pure coincidence.
So, why did this move from entertainment to governance work? Well, the theory says it's because we, the audience, were already preconditioned. The Apprentice had spent years drilling a very specific image of command into our heads. We didn't need a long political argument to understand the role. We'd already watched it play out in the boardroom every week. And this brings us to the final, powerful conclusion of this whole thought experiment, the moment where that line between the TV simulation and our political reality seems to just disappear.
This is the final claim from Duke and Crawford. The rehearsal became policy. The format became rule. The simulated world of the TV show didn't just predict what was coming. In a way, it actually created it. The rules of the game, the dramatic rituals, the persona of the all-powerful sovereign, it all just crossed over from the set into the actual machinery of government.
And the source leaves us with this one last really provocative question. As we watch modern politics, with all its stagecraft and spectacle, it asks, has the simulation become so total that it's now structuring reality itself? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where exactly does the show end, and where does the real world even begin?